desperate for you. I surrender. Drench my soul as mercy and grace unfold. I hunger and thirst.
1. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. Matthew chapter 28, verse 1. The New English NEB renders the verse this way. The Sabbath had passed, and it was about daybreak on Sunday when Mary of Magdala and the other Mary came to look at the grave. Where the Authorized Version or King James Version says the first day of the week, the NEB says Sunday. 2 days are mentioned. One is given a sacred title, the end of the Sabbath, and the other numerical value, first day of the week. Note also the first day did not begin until the end of the Sabbath. There is no transference of the Sabbath day here. Sunday sanctity is missing here, and it is not explained in the surrounding verses either. In fact, Mary did not attend to Jesus on the Sabbath day because she rested in accordance with the commandment. Then they returned and prepared spices, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. Luke chapter 23, verse 56, New King James Version. 2. And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome had brought sweet spices, that they might come and anoint him. And very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the sepulchre at the rising of the sun. Mark chapter 16, verse 1 and 2. Mark's record was, according to some scholars, written approximately 10 years after the resurrection. Mark refers to the same event as it was described by Matthew, and he agrees with Matthew that the Sabbath was past. Again, we have biblical evidence that the Sabbath and the first day are two distinct and separate days. Certainly, Mark places no sacredness on the first day in this reference. Jesus' followers had come on Sunday to engage in labor, the customary embalming of the body of the crucified Christ. They knew no sacredness attached to the day and were prepared to toil at a very unpleasant task. 3. Now, when Jesus was risen early, the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils. Mark chapter 16, verse 9. There is not a word in this verse indicating that Sunday should be the new Christian Sabbath. 4. And that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on. And the women also, which came with him from Galilee, followed after, and beheld the sepulchre, and how his body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and ointments, and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. Now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came unto the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. Luke chapter 23, verse 54, and chapter 24, verse 1. So you read all those scriptures for that point to the chapter 24, verse 1. Before sunset, and that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on. Friday was called the preparation, implying preparation for the Sabbath. The Sabbath began at sunset. The Sabbath was observed from Friday evening until Saturday evening. God, the reckoning of the day from sunset to sunset, right from the very dawn of history. And the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning were the second day. Genesis chapter 1, verse 5 and 8. 5. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. John chapter 20, verse 1. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John each give parallel accounts of the work of Christ on earth. This is the reason for the repetition in the above verses quoted. Nothing is said about Sunday sacredness, nothing to suggest that Sunday should be kept as the Sabbath. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in the midst and saith unto them, Peace be unto you. John chapter 20, verse 19. The text says nothing about the disciples holding a meeting in honor of Christ's resurrection. In fact, they took the resurrection report of Luke as idle tales, and they believed them not. Luke chapter 24, verse 11. As is stated clearly in John chapter 20, verse 19, the doors were shut, not for a meeting or celebration of the resurrection, but for fear of the Jews. The disciples were hiding from the Jewish persecutors. They assembled from fear, not for worship. While it is true that Christ rose from the grave on Easter Sunday, however, by the way, there is a new discovery which I will make in a presentation later regarding Easter Sunday. But in any way, there is no evidence for keeping Sunday in honor of the resurrection. The Bible teaches that baptism, rather than Sunday, is the memorial to the resurrection of Christ. Like the two other New Testament verses are used to validate Sunday Sabbath, when they really validate Saturday Sabbath. 1. The like figure whereunto even baptism doth also now save us, by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 21. See also Romans chapter 6, verse 3 and 4, and Colossians chapter 2, verse 12. While there are as many as 84 Sabbath services recorded in Acts, there is only one mention of the first day, and it does not support Sunday sacredness. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. Acts chapter 20, verse 7. The New English Bible identifies the time. When the disciples came together to break bread on the Saturday night in order to assemble for the breaking of bread, Paul, who was to leave the next day, addressed them and went on speaking until midnight. Acts chapter 20, verse 7, New English Bible. An evening meeting is recorded on the first day of the week. This means that since the Sabbath ended at sunset, the first day of the week began according to Bible reckoning. The New English Bible puts it in modern language and uses the words on Saturday night. It is recorded that Paul continued his speech until midnight on Saturday. Eventually, Paul had visited all-day Sabbath with them and was persuaded to stay on that night and speak further, according to Acts chapter 20, verse 11. Talked a long while, even till break of day, so he departed. Paul did not stay on the Sunday, which would have been the which would have been the case if Sunday was the new Sabbath. Indeed, it was only after the Sabbath that the disciples came together to have a meal together, and Paul spoke to them until daybreak on Sunday morning. And then he left on a long journey by foot, an act that would never have been sanctioned on the Sabbath day. The fact that Paul undertook a long journey by foot alone shows that the first day of the week, Sunday, was not held in any special regard. The text is thus in of Sabbath sanctity rather than Sunday sanctity. The fact that the disciples broke bread together on the Sunday is often used as a support of Sunday worship. This is, however, not the case, as the disciples ate together every day of the week. The partaking of communion is not limited to Sunday. And they continued daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, and did eat their food with gladness of heart. Acts chapter 2, verse 46. For as often as ye eat this bread, and drink this cup, ye do shew the Lord's death till he comes. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 26. 2. Now, concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 1 and 2. Paul is referring to set aside for God's work. This was to be done on the first day of the week. Paul regarded the sanctity of the Sabbath so highly that he suggested that the calculating of tithes and offerings should not be carried out until after the preparation day and the Sabbath. He suggested rather that this work be done on the first day of the week, so that it wouldn't be spent on other less necessary items in the course of the subsequent week, rather than to distract or detract from the Saturday Sabbath. This verse supports it. Creation and the Sabbath. As the earth came forth from the hand of its maker, it was. Its surface was diversified with mountains, hills, and plains, interspersed with noble rivers and lovely lakes. But the hills and mountains were not abrupt and rugged, abounding in terrific steeps and frightening chasms as they now do. The sharp, ragged edges of Earth's rocky framework were buried beneath the fruitful, which everywhere produced a luxuriant growth of verdure. There were no loathsome swamps or barren deserts. Graceful shrubs and delicate flowers greeted the eye at every turn. The heights were crowned with trees more majestic than any that now exist. The air, untainted by foul miasma, was clear and beautiful. The entire landscape outweighed in beauty the decorated grounds of the proudest palace. The angelic host viewed this scene with delight and rejoiced at the wonderful works of God. After the earth with its teeming animal and vegetable life had been called into existence, man, the crowning work of the Creator, and the one for whom the beautiful earth had been fitted up, was brought upon the stage of action. To him was given dominion over all that his eye could behold. For God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over all the earth." So God created man in his own image. Male and female created he them. Here is clearly set forth, and the divine record is so plainly stated that there is no occasion for. God created man in his own image. Here is no mystery. There is no ground for the supposition that man was from the lower forms of animal or vegetable life. Such teaching lowers the great work of the Creator to the level of man's narrow, earthly conceptions. Men are so intent upon excluding God from the sovereignty of the universe that they degrade man and defraud him of the dignity of his origin. He who set the starry worlds on high and tinted with delicate skill the flowers of the field, who filled the earth and the heavens with the wonders of its power, when he came to crown his glorious work, to place one in the midst to stand as ruler of the fair earth, did not fail to create a being worthy of the hand that gave him life. The fact of our race, as given by inspiration, traces back its origins not to a line of, but to the great Creator. Though formed from the dust, Adam was the Son of God. He was placed as God's representative over the lower orders of being. They cannot understand or acknowledge the sovereignty of God, yet they were made capable of loving and serving man. The psalmist says, "Thou madest him to have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet, the beasts of the field, the fowl of the air, and whatsoever passes through the paths of the sea." Psalms chapter 8, verse 6 through 8. Man was to bear God's image, both in outward resemblance and in character. Christ alone is the express image, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, of the Father. But man was formed in the likeness of God. His nature was with the will of God. His mind was capable of comprehending divine things. His affections were pure. His appetites and passions were under the control of reason. He was holy and happy in bearing the image of God in perfect obedience to his will. As man came forth from the land of his Creator, he was of lofty stature and perfect symmetry. His countenance bore the ruddy tint of health and glowed with the light of life and joy. Adam's height was much greater than that of men who now inhabit the earth. Eve was somewhat less in stature, yet her form was noble and full of beauty. The sinless pair wore no artificial garments. They were clothed with a covering of light and glory, such as the angels wear, so long as they lived in obedience to God. This robe of light continued to enshroud them. After the creation of Adam, every living creature was brought before him to receive its name. He saw that to each had been given a companion, but among them there was not found an helpmeet for him. Among all the creatures that God had made on the earth, there was not one equal to man. And God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him an helpmeet for him." Man was not made to dwell in solitude. He was to be a social being. Without companionship, the beautiful scenes and delightful employments of Eden would have failed to yield perfect happiness. Even communion with angels could not have satisfied his desire for sympathy and companionship. There was none of the same nature to love and to be loved. God himself gave Adam a companion. He provided an helpmeet for him, a helper corresponding to him, one who was fitted to be his companion, and who would be one with him in love and sympathy. Eve was created from a rib taken from the side of Adam, signifying that she was not to control him as the head, nor to be trampled under his feet as an inferior, but to stand by his side as an equal, to be loved and protected by him. A part of man, bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, she was his second half, or second self, showing the close union and the affectionate attachment that should exist in this relation. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 29. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one. God celebrated the first marriage. Thus the institution has for its originator the Creator of the universe. Marriage is honorable. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. It was one of the first gifts of God to man, and it is one of the two institutions that, after the fall, Adam brought with him beyond the gates of paradise. When the divine principles are recognized and obeyed in this relation, marriage is a blessing. It guards the purity and happiness of the race. It provides for man's social needs. It elevates the physical, the intellectual, and the moral nature. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Everything that God had made was the perfection of beauty, and nothing seemed wanting that could contribute to the happiness of the holy pair. Yet the Creator gave them still another token of his love by preparing a garden especially for their home. In this garden were trees of every variety, many of them laden with fragrant and delicious fruit. There were lovely vines growing upright, yet presenting a most graceful appearance, with their branches drooping under their load of tempting fruit of the richest and most varied hues. It was the work of Adam and Eve to train the branches of the vine to form bowers, thus making for themselves a dwelling from living trees covered with foliage and fruit. There were fragrant flowers of every hue in rich profusion. In the midst of the garden stood the tree of life, surpassing in glory all other trees. Its fruit appeared like apples of gold and silver, and had the power to perpetuate life. The creation was now complete. The heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Eden bloomed on earth. Adam and Eve had free access to the tree of life. No taint of sin or shadow of death marred the fair creation. The morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Job chapter 38, verse 7. The great Jehovah had laid the foundations of the earth. He had dressed the whole world in the garb of beauty and had filled it with things useful to man. He had created all the wonders of the land and of the sea. In 6 days, the great work of creation had been accomplished, and God rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. God looked with sanctification upon the work of his hands. All was perfect, worthy of its divine author, and he rested, not as one weary, but as well pleased with the fruits of his wisdom and goodness and the manifestations of his glory. After resting upon the seventh day, God sanctified it, or set it apart, as a day of rest for man. Following the example of the Creator, man was to rest upon this sacred day, that as he should look upon the heavens and the earth, he might reflect upon God's great work of creation, and that as he should behold the evidences of God's wisdom and goodness, his heart might be filled with love and reverence for his Maker. In Eden, God set up the memorial of his work of creation, placing his blessing upon the seventh day. Then the Father and representative of the whole human family. In observance was to be an act of grateful acknowledgement on the part of all who should dwell upon the earth, that God was their creator and their rightful sovereign, that they were the work of his hands and the subjects of his authority. Thus the institution was wholly commemorative and given to all mankind. There was nothing in it shadowy or of restricted application to any people. God saw that a Sabbath was essential for man, even in paradise. He needed to lay aside his own interests and pursuits for one day of the 7, that he might more fully contemplate the works of God and meditate upon his power and goodness. He needed a Sabbath to remind him more vividly of God and to awaken gratitude, because all that he enjoyed and possessed came from the benefit hand of the Creator. God designs that the Sabbath shall direct the minds of men to the contemplation of his created works. Nature speaks to their senses, declaring that there is a living God, the Creator, the supreme ruler of all. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. Psalms chapter 19, verse 1 and 2. The beauty that clothes the earth is token of creation. We may behold it in the everlasting hills, in the lofty trees, in the opening buds, and the delicate flowers. All speak to us of God. The Sabbath, ever pointing to him who made them all, bids men open the great book of nature and trace therein the wisdom, the power, and the love of the Creator. Was the first week literally 7 days? The first 6 days of each week are given to man for labor, because God employed the same period of the first week in the work of creation. On the 7th day, man is to refrain from labor in commemoration of the Creator's rest. But the assumption that required thousands upon thousands of years strikes directly at the foundation of the earth commandment. Let me reread that again. My screen's jumping here. Alright, but the assumption that required thousands upon thousands of years strikes directly at the foundation of the 4th commandment. That's what I meant to say. It represents the Creator as commanding men to observe the week of literal days in commemoration of vast, indefinite periods. This is unlike his method of dealing with his creatures. It makes indefinite and obscure that which he has made very plain. It is indefinitely in its most insidious and hence most dangerous form. Its real character is so disguised that it is held and taught by many who profess to believe the Bible. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. Psalms chapter 33, verse 6 and 9. The Bible recognizes no in which the earth was slow from chaos. Of each successive day of creation, the sacred record declares that it consisted of the evening and the morning, like all other days that have followed. At the close of each day is given the result of the Creator's work. The statement is made at the close of the first week's record. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created. Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. But this does not convey the idea that the days of creation were other than literal days. Each day was called a generation because that in it God generated or produced some new portion of his work. Geology and the Bible's record. Geologists claim to find evidence from the earth itself that it is very much older than the Mosaic record teaches. Bones of men, and as well as instruments of warfare, etc., much larger than any that now exist or that have existed for thousands of years have been discovered, and from this it is inferred that the earth was populated long before the time brought to view in the record of creation, and by a race of beings vastly superior in size to any men now living. Such reasoning has led many professed Bible believers to adopt the position that the days of creation were vast, indefinite periods. But apart from the Bible history, it can prove nothing. Those who reason so confidently upon its discoveries have no adequate conception of the size of men, animals, and trees before the flood, or of the great changes which then took place, and do give evidence of conditions differing in many respects from the present, but the time when these conditions existed can be learned only from the inspired record. In the history of the flood, inspiration has explained that which geology alone could never fathom. In the days of Noah, men, animals, and trees, many times larger than now exist, were buried, and thus God designed that the discovery of these things should establish faith in inspired history. But men, with their vain reasoning, fall into the same error as did the people before the flood. The things which God gave them as a benefit, they turn into a curse by making a wrong use of them. It is one of Satan's to the people to accept the fables of infidelity, for he can thus obscure the law of God in itself very plain, and embolden men to rebel against the divine government. His efforts are especially directed against this because it is so clearly points to the living God, the maker of the heavens and the earth. There is a consistent effort made to explain the work of creation as the result of natural causes, and is accepted even by professed Christians in opposition to plain scriptural facts. There are many who oppose the investigation of the prophecies, especially those of, and declaring them to be obscure, that we cannot understand them. Yet these very persons eagerly receive the suppositions of geologists in contradiction of the Mosaic record. But if that which God has revealed is so difficult to understand, how inconsistent it is to accept mere suppositions in regard to that which He has not revealed. The secret things belong unto the Lord our God. But those things which are revealed belong unto us, and to our children forever. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29. Just how God accomplished the work of creation, He has never revealed to men. Human science cannot search out the secrets of the Most High. This article is from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 111 to 116. The day may be very near when we shall all have to fight the battle of the Reformation over again. Grattan Guinness. The Bible tells us to keep the seventh day holy. However, that was written thousands of years ago and came over 2 millennia ago. Has the weekly cycle changed since then? How can we be sure that the modern Seventh Day Saturday is still the day God intends for our Sabbath? According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the week is a period of 7 days. It has been employed from time immemorial in almost all Eastern countries. Our seventh day has always been Saturday, even though there have been some adjustments to the calendar. Calendar adjustments. The Julian calendar, instituted in 46 BC by Julius Caesar, was the calendar in place in the time of Jesus. It numbered the days of the week, but gave the seventh day the name Shabbat, which means Sabbath rest. In many languages, the word for Saturday still reflects these. A small change came to the Julian calendar when Augustus Caesar decided that he wanted to name a month after himself. He chose the 8th month and added to it a day from February in order to give it the full 31 days. The weekly cycle was not affected by this change to the month of August. After Augustus' adjustments, there were no change to the calendar until 1582, when the Gregorian calendar was introduced. This calendar is still in effect today. Pope Gregory established this calendar to correct an error that had caused the Julian calendar to become more inaccurate every year. In fact, every 128 years, the calendar was becoming an extra day out of sync with the equinoxes and solstices. Gregory omitted 10 days from the calendar by decreeing that the day after Thursday, October 4th, 1582, would be Friday, October 15th, 1582. This change brought the calendar back in sync, but did not affect the order of the days of the week. Assurance and obedience. This is what the U.S. Naval Observatory has to say about the order of the week. We have had occasion to investigate the results of the works of specialists in chronology, and we have never found one of them that has ever had the slightest doubt about the continuity of the weekly cycle since long before the Christian era. God set apart the Seventh Day Sabbath during creation. He reinforced the Sabbath in the time of Moses, Exodus chapter 16, and made Sabbath keeping the law. Through history, the Jewish people have kept the Sabbath day holy, and they celebrated it as well. The order of the week has not changed, nor has the joy that comes when we obey God and spend the seventh day with Him. First note, 11th edition, volume 4, page 988. Second note, S. Berkowitz is Our Modern Saturday the Sabbath, A History of Calendar Change. Let me read that. This is like a web address. remnantofgod.org. Third note, the change from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. You can look that one up at searchforancestors.com, all lowercase. It is copyrighted from 1997 to 2009. Note number 4 is IBID. And finally, note number 5, letter regarding continuity of the weekly cycle, U.S. Naval Observatory, Washington, D.C., March 12, 1932, as quoted in, Has the Calendar Been Changed? Sabbath and Antichrist Truth Revealed. And the address you can look up on that one is God'sSabbathTruth.com, all lowercase. Many know very little about lunar Sabbaths, but much is being said about the concept nowadays. Every argument thinkable is being used to convince us of its legitimacy. The idea is sweeping through many Sabbath-keeping churches, bringing confusion and doubt, and it is gaining momentum. What is the truth about lunar Sabbaths? It is my understanding to clear and logical truth on this important subject. I hope to strengthen you with a scriptural basis for keeping the true seventh-day biblical Sabbath that God gave to humanity at creation. The lunar Sabbaths are in total contradiction to the seventh-day cycle given to us by God at creation. The concept of the lunar Sabbath uses the moon to determine when the week begins and ends. This being the case, the Sabbath might begin on any day of the week. The moon has a 29.5-day cycle. Because you cannot split a day in half, this means that some months will have 29 days while others will have 30 days. Imagine the confusion.
Anytime a heart turns from darkness to light, anytime temptation comes and someone stands to fight, anytime somebody lives to serve and not be served, I know God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move in many mighty ways. God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move today. Anytime in weakness someone falls upon their knees or dares to speak the truth that sets men free, anytime the choice is made to stand upon the word, I know God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move in many mighty ways. God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move today. I see a generation standing on the truth in each and every nation. God is on the move. Anytime the gospel stirs a searching soul, and someone says, "Send me, here I go," I know